All right. Let me just. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Jackson, and today is February 20th, uh, 2024, and it is Black History Month. Today, I'm so excited for my special guest for my continued story project interviews. And um, this is actually part two of our conversation and learning more about national parks in reference to African Americans and their contributions. And I'm thrilled just because from the last interview that I did during Black and National Parks Week of 2021, we shared so much awesome information, and I'm excited to continue because it's been over 2 years since we last talked, and a lot has happened with this park site since we had that discussion. So I'm excited to hear more updates of what's going on with that. But first and foremost, again, my name is Nicole Jackson, founder of Black and National Parks Week, which was established back in August of 2020 to highlight and amplify the contributions um, and just pretty much celebrating Black people and their experiences and visits to national parks within the United States. So this is technically year five for me that I've been doing this. So I'm really excited to continue my efforts. And the story project that I'm doing is just a continuation of sharing that information, sharing the joy, sharing the experiences of everyday Black people, but also um, Black people within the National Park Service. And today I have here with me Keena Graham, who is the superintendent of the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Home National Monument Park site. So if you would like to join us and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Keena Graham. I'm the superintendent at the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Home National Monument. I've been working for the National Park Service on and off for 20, 22, 23 years. I also spent 4 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at a wildlife refuge in New Jersey, outside of Atlantic City.
Awesome. So you have quite the resume of things you've done, and even just with this site alone, which was established in December of 2020. It was originally, I believe, a landmark
Yeah, National
site
Historic
before
Landmark.
it had its official established designation. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think it was 2016, 2017. The home was designated as a National Historic Landmark. It's pretty much all intact with the exception of the floors, but it is where Medgar and Myrlie Evers lived from 1956 to 1963. She lived there an additional year after his assassination, right there in the carport of their home. So she was there throughout Freedom Summer of 1964 before she and the kids moved to California.
Wow. So there's definitely a substantial amount of history there in relation to the civil rights movement,
Mhm.
even before Medgar's death. And I think highlighting that through this being a park site is so important. So I kind of want to go back to some of the things we referenced in our last interview back in August of 2021. You did give some kind of background of the establishment of the national park site, but also just it's the home of
Mhm.
Medgar and Myrlie Evers. So kind of provide a little bit of, I guess, context of what was happening around that time, like before the death, but why, and you're based in Jackson, Mississippi,
Mhm.
why that was such a prominent site.
So it's the nerve center for the Jackson movement. Although Medgar had an official office at Stringer Lodge, was a Masonic lodge that still exists to this day and still active. It wasn't their building. It wasn't the NAACP's building. And so you can imagine where he's knee deep into conversations and meetings with people. And hey, lights got to go out. You got to get out. We're closing for the day. And lots of times that would spill over to the home. Another thing is that the great author and academic Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander lived in that very same neighborhood, just maybe 5 or 6 houses down. And her friends who would visit her, she would often bring them to meet Medgar and Myrlie Evers. And so we're talking about people like Sonia Sanchez and James Baldwin and Dick Gregory. And once they met with him and had that conversation with Medgar, because his style was more reason,
Mhm.
he got his degree in business administration, so he was a very logical man. They would leave there radicalized, and I mean that term in the best way possible, really ready to take on the world, to change, the world to be better, to live up to the ideals of the American government, this country.
Wow, that's amazing. There's so many things woven into that I want to touch on. I kind of want to loop back to your, I guess, personal experience within this role, being a superintendent, and like how that kind of ties into all of the civil rights history, but your own history. Can you share a little bit about um, your connection to this site, the work, but also like how do you become a superintendent of a national park site? Like how does that work?
So first off, because I was a part of this training that Gilder Lamon hosted in, and I say the early 2000s, it was called Stony the Road We Trod, and it was about the modern civil rights movement. And I was happy that they used that term because we tend to think there's only one civil rights movement. And as I say now to people, as long as human beings have been on this planet, there's been a civil rights movement, a movement for social justice, and it
Yeah.
will never stop. So we're just talking about this period here. And so one of the homework assignments that was given to us by Gilder Lehrman was to go home and talk to your family to see what their experiences were like during this iteration of the civil rights movement. And lo and behold, found out that my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, were very much involved in the civil rights movement in Tuscaloosa. My grandfather, he had this wonderful, wonderful, deep singing voice, even though he worked at a paper mill, then later he was a janitor. But he and his brothers and his friends would sing to raise money for the movement. My grandmother, fighter in every sense of the word, could not sing, but
Mhm.
she could organize and she can whip some booty. And so, she was on her way to a meeting, a civil rights meeting one night, and the police, who were a part of the Klan in Tuscaloosa, tried to kidnap her.
Mhm.
And so she raised such a ruckus that everybody started looking at them. And so they threw her out of the car. Her comment was that she knew that if she got in that car, she would be dead. And so she would rather fight and die that way. And so I did not know any of that. That's not the history that I studied in undergrad or grad school. I was way back in time in American history. And so that led me down the road to learn more about this iteration of the civil rights movement. You asked the question of how to become a superintendent. I have no idea. I applied because I was interested in the history, but
Mhm.
also realizing that you can make a difference no matter what position or what skills you have. So my grandma would organize and beat the crap out of people sometimes when she had to. My grandfather sang, and here I
Mhm.
am, this egghead historian, but
Mhm.
also I consider myself to be a storyteller. And so I thought to myself, that's how I can contribute to this iteration of the civil rights movement today of social justice. And so I applied while I was up at a National Wildlife Refuge in New Jersey, and I got the job. So I was just as surprised as anybody else, going, what?
That's awesome. And I love that the honesty of it, of like, there's no, blueprint. There's no right way. You just, have this interest and you just go with that, and it will take you many places. So understanding that kind of these different connections, how has that helped you specifically with your storytelling of connecting your story to Medgar and Myrlie Evers' journey?
It helps a lot because I talk about my maternal grandparents um, but I don't talk about my paternal side of my family, which I find out weren't super supportive of the civil rights movement. And that story connects to what Medgar and Myrlie Evers were going through. We tend to think that, every Black person in the world supported the civil rights movement, that iteration of the civil rights movement. That's not true.
Mhm.
Medgar had pastors of churches dropping dimes on him to the Sovereignty Commission, which was paid for, endorsed, created by the state of Mississippi to uphold segregation. They were bold about that. This is not me making up stuff. They were bold about their intention. And the citizens' councils, which we call the white citizens' councils, because that was supposed to be done on a county or city level, right, to
Mhm.
uphold segregation. And so you get that some of the prominent Black people who own newspapers were dropping dimes on him. Some of the teachers were, some of the business people, and all of these are Black people. And somebody said to me, "Oh, they were afraid. That's the reason why they did it." And it's like, give us some agency.
Mm.
Some may have been afraid. Some may have been afraid to lose what they got, what they had, and they
Yeah.
wanted to keep it. Some were jealous of him
Mm.
because he's getting this prominence in the community now. Just like there are many different reasons why white folk did what they did, there were many different reasons why Black folk did it. And all of it wasn't, oh, I'm so scared that I might lose my life. Some of it was
Mhm.
greed, just greed.
Mhm. Can you paint us a picture of during that time what those communities, looked like in terms of activism or home ownership or even, businesses?
Right. So Mary and Myrlie Evers lived in a neighborhood which was called El Rain, and it was the first developed Black neighborhood in Jackson. And what we're finding out is probably in the Southeast. What do I mean by that? You'll have people buying a home in a subdivision or a built up neighborhood or something like that, and that wasn't done in Jackson before. This was the first time. And so these two Black gentlemen who were veterans weren't
Mhm.
able to get a loan from traditional banks, but because the law was passed, I think the tail end of FDR administration, Truman administration, that you could get loans from the federal government, from the VA, if you were a veteran. So they were able to get that loan from that program to carve out this Black neighborhood, middle class neighborhood in the middle of a white section of town.
Mhm.
And so you had this little oasis surrounded by people who still hated your guts.
Right.
And that neighborhood was filled with people like Margaret Walker Alexander or the Wellses who lived next door. And Mr. Houston Wells had his own business on Fair
Mhm.
Street, their Black Wall Street, if you will. And so all sorts of people are living there, and they were his friends. And they were telling him when they saw suspicious cars or suspicious people walking through. And that's the reason why Miss Murley told me when I got this job through her daughter, Rena Evers, that we must talk about community. She was insistent upon that. Do not ever talk about Medgar and Myrlie Evers as being these great people all by themselves, because no one can do it themselves. They had the community of their friends in that neighborhood, the community of other civil rights activists, the community of their family, and the community of their friends. That's how they did what they did. So talk about that. And
Mhm.
so that's some of those communities right there. On the west part of town, even though this is considered the west part of Jackson, you had these prominent people who were living in pretty much ghetto areas. And
Mhm.
what I mean by that is, in the truest sense of the word, where the city is pushing them, saying, you can't live anyplace else but here. So finally, they get this opportunity to have a slice of middle class America. And
Mhm.
so this is what you had going on in Jackson.
So what did I guess in terms of the family itself, obviously, he was married, but how many children did he have or did they have and what did their lives look like at that time?
So they had three children, but I must stress that when Medgar was assassinated, Ms. Myrlie was pregnant with her fourth child. So again, another consequence of the assassination, she lost that fourth child. In my eyes, Byron Della Beckwith should have been charged with two murders. Now, Rena, and she remembers a very idyllic childhood because she says that, her father would race the other neighborhood kids up and down the street. He would ride the bike, play hide and go seek with them. They would have to go pick berries from it because everybody had a garden. And so they would pick blackberries and bring them back, and their mom would make cobbler. They would dance the twist with their dad inside the home. However, she also speaks to near the end of his life, phone ringing, and as she puts it, you hear, Merry Christmas or Happy
Mhm.
Birthday or, I love you, all of those things. But that turned into people somehow getting his phone number, and she's picking it up as an 8, 9 year old and hearing, this is how we're going to kill your father. And
Wow.
so, I always say, nowadays you hear people say, oh, well, we can't teach kids this history because it might make them feel bad. My response to them is, how about living it?
Yeah.
Actually living it.
Wow. That must have been so traumatic and yeah, still being expected to live your life and, be
Hmm.
a kid and whatever that means in terms
Hmm.
of that. Um, these bigger national issues that are taking place and making it very local because it is your everyday. And I'm glad you mentioned the components of just living. Like, what does that look
Hmm.
like? To have a
Yep.
garden or to be able to play with other kids and not necessarily like everybody's on guard, 24
Right.
7 and
Right.
having to constantly think about these situations where it's life or it can be life or death. So
Hmm.
um this is again, it's gonna be like back to our original interview conversation, like when you were even just sharing a little bit about the Medgar, like his work, but also just connections to prominent people in the civil rights movement. I want to go back to that and help people understand those connections because he wasn't, like you were saying, wasn't just him, it wasn't just merely,
Oh,
but it was the community. And even in reference to NAACP, Dr. Martin Luther King, and even Emmett Till. Can you help us understand what those connections were?
sure. So Medgar is tapped to be the field secretary of the NAACP in 1955, November of 1955. Now you got to think about this because this is another one of my pet peeves when people talk about, these kids these days, they're not like us, they're not, or, all of that stuff and romanticize all of this. What I love about Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton is that he illustrates so well that the nation wouldn't have been a nation without these kids these days. They
Mhm.
were all very young. So Medgar's first case that he investigated, and might I add, his mentor at that time was a woman by the name of Ruby Hurley. And she
Mhm.
was based out of Birmingham. And she's teaching him and people like Aaron Henry, all these lions in Mississippi civil rights history, showing them the ropes. So his first case, he's 25 years old, and he's investigating the murder of Reverend George Lee up in the Delta. His second case that he has to investigate, he's 26 years old now, is the murder of Emmett Till.
Mhm.
So imagine being these kids these days who don't, they're never, they always think about partying and blah, 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 blah. But this is what he's doing at that age. And by the way, there are a lot of kids who are partying at that time. He did it too. You know, he loved a
Yeah.
juke joint just as much as anybody else. But what he's also doing, somehow he gets this bravery. And I attribute that to his upbringing. And also
Hmm.
that's something in him as well that he
Hmm.
worked on. He's going to interview these witnesses, all of these witnesses back here, I mean, in the heart of darkness, if you will. And sometimes he's wearing a suit, but sometimes he's wearing overalls so he can connect to these sharecroppers. He's even putting, Emmett Till family members in his trunk and
Mm.
driving them to safety out of the state because of threats from the KKK.
Hmm.
That's what he's doing in 1955 as a 25, 26 year old. Now, fast forward, he started to see through SNCC, who did, direct action and all of that, that everybody was pretty much aiming for the same goal, but they're doing it different ways. So this
Hmm.
leads him to serve as secretary of the SELC under MLK. Now, NAACP wasn't happy about that, so they forced him to resign. But you could clearly start to see that he was a guy that was all about reaching across the aisles to get the work done. So working
Mm.
with SNCC, working with SELC, CORE, every organization that you can think of, and seeing where there's a nexus that they can work together to solve some of these issues.
Wow. Oh, this is definitely shedding more light on, again, that these aren't individual, siloed things, or people. And it helps to make those connection um, make more sense, I guess, from a
Mhm.
historical lens. And how, they were, everybody just, I think, assumes just they were at odds, and obviously there
No.
were um, disagreements. And, like you were saying earlier, even Black people did not agree with what was taking place, but um, there's so much effort on the ground and behind the scenes that
Mhm.
wasn't amplified or referenced. And even thinking about when I think I asked in our last discussion, you were saying that there was documentation from Medgar, and you had like a collection of boxes of information, and I think you said like 30 something that he
Yeah.
had to
So
like
yeah.
go through and like, yeah, just start from zero is what you said
Mhm.
specifically, with all of that information. And
Mhm.
how has that progressed? And are you still navigating
Oh
that information?
my God, yes. So the Mississippi Department of Archives and History has 33 boxes of the Medgar and Myrlie Evers papers.
Mm.
On top of that, Miss Myrlie just donated a large collection of her personal papers to Pomona College, where she graduated
Wow.
from. So we keep getting more and more and more good stuff to learn
Mm.
more about them as human beings, but how they made it work
Yeah.
as
Hmm.
as a married couple, because aside from all of this civil rights stuff, you're still individuals and you're still a unit. If being married and being partner up is hard enough with kids, so on top of all of that, they're having to navigate that as a couple, as parents, as friends, and oh, by the way, we're trying to change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is something I don't think they were like, this is what I'm actively like wanting to do. I think it's just more because of their lived experience. It's because of the changes they wanted to see um, within their own lives, within their community, and like,
Mhm.
expanding out that, this is part of that journey. This is part of the work. Um, and going back to Myrlie, like, was there, I don't know if you have any documentation or even like kind of information or diaries or anything where it's just like she had reservations about what her husband was
Oh
doing, and
my
how that
God.
impacted family.
This comes out of her own mouth, and
Mhm.
so you can find a lot of her interviews on YouTube, but when she was here for the 60th, she even talked to different audiences about that. I mean, we have to remember that when she met Megger, she was 17 years old.
Mhm.
And he was 7 years older than she was.
Mhm.
And she was raised, I mean, came from a wonderful background. Her grandmother and her aunt raised her, but they wanted her to find a nice boy, a guy who wasn't into sports and all of this other stuff. And so the first person she meets when she goes to Alcorn was Medgar Evers in his football uniform. So the very thing, or they didn't even want her to be with a veteran. So here he is, a veteran, an athlete, and he's already involved in the civil rights movement. So no, 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 no. And she talks about that. Like she wasn't as aware of things as he was. And so
Mm.
sometimes he would get frustrated with her, like,
Mhm.
don't you know? Don't you know? So in a sense, he raised her up in the civil rights movement, and she learned very well, very well. But when they got married, yeah, there was a period where they split up, again, for very adult reasons,
Right.
not because he cheated or she cheated or, somebody messed up the money or anything else like
Yeah.
that, but because both of their definitions of what it means to live.
Right.
What does
Mm.
life really mean? To
Yeah.
her, at that time, it was, you know, breathing, like biologically being alive so you can be here for me, you can be here for your children. And plus, she didn't want to see the love of her life die. To
Yeah.
him, that means nothing if they can't be full citizens. If they
Mhm.
can't do the job that they choose to have, go to the school that they want to go to, live in the neighborhood that they want to live in, vote, do all of those things. So they
Yeah.
had to work that out to reconnect. And they did. They did.
Wow. So was there a huge impact on her? Did she share out about the investigation that Medgar was doing on Emmett Till? So I would assume as a mother, like that's
Right.
you don't necessarily, have the words. It's a period of mourning and fear, but then also it is a cry out to people that, children are part very much a part of that. Yeah.
100%, because by that time she was a mother of two.
Hmm.
However, she was there for Mamie
Hmm.
Till. And so she provided comfort along with other women like Ruby Hurley for her. So this was this community of women, which included Miss Myrlie, who wrapped their arms around Mamie Till when she was down here in the Delta to help her walk through this grief.
Yeah.
So she was very much a part of this case, not just him, not just Megger, but she was as well.
So this year, I think it's July,
Mhm.
marks it's the 60th of the Civil Rights Act
Yeah.
that was passed by Lyndon B. Johnson.
Mhm.
Um,
And signed on
and
Megger's birthday.
mhm. So can you give us a little context of that taking place? Because this was literally right after Kennedy was assassinated as well. So
Yeah.
there's just a lot of things going on. Can you paint that picture for us and kind of
Yeah.
um, help us understand how that led to the more, I guess, more conversations about desegregation and how
Mhm.
that was going to impact communities across the nation.
So my staff and I, our management team, we were chatting about this morning. Like, what are we planning? What are we doing? Um, and the July 11th, not
Hmm.
not July 11th, but June 11th. What people forget is at that same time, you had the stand at the schoolhouse door with George Wallace at the University of Alabama. And so
Hmm.
that's where he's standing there trying to prevent the three Alabama students from enrolling in classes and his segregation now, that whole speech. And you have the National Guard. Well, Medgar and other civil rights leaders knew something was going to happen. What
Right.
they also knew, because Kennedy alerted them to it, is that he was going to use that as an opportunity to talk about the federal commitment, strengthen the federal commitment to civil rights.
Hmm.
It's the Civil Rights Act. And so that's why Medgar on that day wanted Miss Myrlie and his children to pay attention, because Kennedy was going to give that speech that day. So now
Mhm.
we know that Kennedy made this deal with George Wallace. You show your butt, you do whatever, and it looks like you're a tough guy, but you're not going to do anything.
Right.
Like what went down at the University of Mississippi, which Medgar was a part of that. And then I'm going to say so both of us can save face.
Yeah.
He knew this. And so he just thought it was going to be momentous. And it was. It was finally the federal government was going to put teeth behind civil rights.
Mhm.
Whereas before, you got people in Mississippi saying, okay, NAACP, y'all are fighting for all these laws, but how are you going to make Mississippi enforce it? You can't.
Yeah.
Now you have the federal government saying through Kennedy, we're going to enforce it.
Mhm.
If they don't do right, we're going to enforce it. And so they watched that speech that night. He's in another area, of town, and she's at home with the kids watching this. And then we know what happens next. He gets assassinated. So Kennedy is still fighting for his promise to these civil rights leaders and activists. And so when he gets assassinated, Johnson picks it up.
Mhm.
It is deliberate that it's signed on his birthday to pay homage to the sacrifice that Medgar made and the hard work. Because I must reiterate that the family says, do not let the bullet be the final say.
Yeah.
Don't. Even though, it's like he's a martyr and what have you, this man was living. He wanted to live a full life. So the acts that he did while he was alive, led to the passage of this act. And so they wanted to pay homage to him on what would have been his 39th birthday, to sign that, to say, thank you, Medgar.
Wow. 39. Wow. Um, how did I mean, I can't imagine just thinking about Myrlie and what she had to go through after that, and even just the tension and the fear, the heightened fear after his assassination of like having to move forward. Like how did she include, I guess obviously part of her journey too is to pass on his legacy. How did she go about doing that? Like continuing to let people know not just about his assassination, his murder, but the work.
Hmm. So first of all, Miss Myrlie came back to Mississippi twice she came back to Mississippi to visit family, what have you, but two really important times was to testify in court during the murder trial, right? Barry Della Beckwith. So she's going through the gauntlet. The governor of Mississippi is staring her down. This is the governor. So when we talk about community, their community, I always say, let's talk about Della Beckwith's community as well.
Yeah.
And his community was filled with powerful politicians that cheered him on. So here she is on the stand testifying. The governor of Mississippi, staring her down, goes over to her husband's murderer, assassin, shakes his hand, pats him on the back. And each time, both times, it was a mistrial. All right. But she keeps coming back. She goes on a speaking tour for the NAACP to talk about her husband's life. But it's not just about her husband.
Yeah.
She herself, heads DEI programs for different, businesses out in California.
Mhm.
She runs for Congress twice. She advises other civil rights leaders. She becomes besties with Dr. Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King. So they had this sorority of grief, if you will, but uplifting each other. And she said she knew she had to put one foot in front of the other for her children, if no one else for her children, because, of the woman she was, but also Medgar told her to take care of my children.
Yeah.
And she did just that. So she just didn't rest on this is my husband's memory. She did things in her own right. She even headed the NAACP for 3 years and got it running in the black again.
Mm,
And she only won by one vote because even in the 90s, men said she was
yeah.
just a widow and did not acknowledge all of the work that she had done since her husband's assassination.
So at that time, after his assassination, how old were the children at that time?
So Daryl was 10, Rena was going on 9, and James Van was 3.
Wow. So I'm and going back to I guess the work itself, because obviously it shows up in different ways. How was the rest of the nation responding to this, his assassination, and were there, even more reservations of continuing the work, and even just, even reference to NAACP and what they had to think about during that time?
Yeah, so I'll start off with the neighborhood. There were people in the neighborhood. I was talking to some old souls great old souls who recently
Mhm.
passed away, but they were saying that up into the 70s, they were still afraid that, night riders, if you will, so white supremacists, would
Mhm.
come in the neighborhood and try to do something to them. So his assassination at his home, again, when we
Yeah.
think about home, that's it in the United States of America, that's sacred. That's sacred. That bullet went through his body and into that home through walls, where if no place else, no matter what race or background you have, you should be able to feel some type of safety.
Yeah.
So they were afraid up into the 70s. And then they start to loosen up a little bit. You had people like Malcolm X. He was supposed to go to what he was in Washington, D.C. For a demonstration. I want to say it was at the Department of Labor or someplace like that.
Hmm.
But he changed his demonstration to be one of honoring Medgar Evers. And so that's Malcolm X. You had King who came here for the funeral. And then you had people like Bob Moses and Ella Baker and Ed King, who were, Ed King was a close confidant of him. Bob Moses was as well, that used that. And, Fannie Lou Hamer, even though they didn't work closely with each other, he influenced her. And
Mm.
so they take his influence, his life, what he did, his legacy, and they create the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party in 1964. And so even though the nation as a whole started to forget about him, if you will, a lot of foot soldiers acknowledge him as one of like on the Mount Rushmore, if you will, of civil rights leaders who influenced them to continue to do what they did.
So thinking about home, like that's like you were saying, it's a sacred place. What was that like for Myrlie to have to
She
like?
had to leave. Yeah. She tried to stick it out for over a year, but the nasty phone calls kept coming, death threats. She realized that her oldest child, Daryl, was having night terrors. Like he couldn't keep food down. It was hard for him to sleep. Every sound that was being made in the house would freak her out, and she would and she just said, I cannot live like this, and my children can't live like this. And she remembered that Medgar said the only other place that he would live outside of Mississippi would be California. He went there and took her there when the NAACP had a convention out in LA, and not really knowing that many
Mhm.
people at all. I think she kind of knew like one person or so. This brave woman packed up her kids. Daryl happened to be at a YMC camp at the time, and so he
Mhm.
joined them separately and moved to a place she never lived in before, did hardly knew anything about.
Was this in thinking about Myrlie and her children, did they move around a lot at all? Like once she established herself in California, was it just this is where we are, this is how we're going to move forward in
Yes,
this new
yes.
state?
Yes. So California, they all consider Mississippi as home, but California is home as well.
Mhm.
Even though when they first got to the neighborhood, um, at that time it was all white, and they heard people.
Was this when the Great Migration was happening?
This is the third wave of the Great
The third wave.
Migration.
Okay.
Yep. People were saying, "Here they come,"
Mm,
and calling them the N word. So it's
wow.
not like they didn't
Yeah.
face racism in California. They did.
Mm,
However, they didn't face the extreme violence in California that they faced in Mississippi.
mhm. Yeah, and I'm recalling what that was like for Emmett Till's mom and like, her having to travel and go through the whole court case and she was very much afraid for her safety. So she had had the community help
Mhm,
her, moving in and out of Mississippi is what I'm
mhm.
remembering as well. Um, the home itself, what I guess in terms of the changes that had happened since his assassination, and the establishment of it becoming a national monument, what were some of those big changes that took place?
I mean, the when Castle Rock shot Ghost of Mississippi, they changed the colors on the outside and inside of the home.
Hmm.
The furnishings, they by that time they were all gone, so they brought in furnishings that were more cinema friendly, I guess, that would pop. And
Hmm.
so as a result, being a national park, what the National Park Service does, Congress said
Yeah.
that we're going to be over historic preservation and all those things that have to deal with culture. We're going through a study right now to find out what were the real colors, what was the furniture, and that includes interviewing the family, friends, and everybody who was ever visited that home.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the 60s, when she finally came into the house, that was the first time her visiting the home as a national park site. She says, "Where's the pink love seat?" And we were like, "Thank you. You had a
Hmm.
pink love
Hmm.
seat. Noted."
So there's still information that you wouldn't have known that the family, like they could vividly remember.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
love
so,
that.
and we always talk about, there's that turquoise color outside of the home, and people are going to get
Mhm.
real mad at us because it's going to change. We knew it wasn't that because this is a man that was all about security. Why would he have the gaudiest color
Yeah.
in the neighborhood and go, "Oh, this is where you can find me here"? It was more of a forest green. So we're ready for people to get really, really ticked off at us because they're going to
Mhm.
swear that it was always this and it wasn't. That was Castle Rock.
Yeah. So you mentioned security, and this takes me back to our previous conversation around the protections that he mentioned, that
Mhm.
he needed to better protect himself and his family. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well,
Oh,
and
yeah.
creating like a fort, essentially
Yeah.
for his home?
Yeah, well, one of the things is again, this is a planned community, so you could choose between 3 different styles of home. He chose the
Hmm.
one that was roughly 900 to 1,000 square feet, so 3-bedroom, 1 bath. He deliberately chose a home that wouldn't be on the ends of the neighborhood. Again, security. So it's within, it is like right in the neighborhood, built into it. He decided that they weren't going to have a front door, but have a side door and a back door. Why? Because again, you're trying to eliminate your back being exposed as much as possible. He also learned from the Army this trick about putting pebbles on the roof. And so they have pebbles on the roof so that if somebody, God forbid, were to get on the roof, they would slip and slide and not make it. And they would also hear them trying to get on the
Hmm.
roof.
Hmm.
Yes, Miss Myrlie loved roses, and roses are a beautiful thing to landscape, especially around your house
Hmm.
because they have thorns.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of these things and making sure that the windows were higher than you would normally have your
Mhm.
windows, especially in the kids' room, and making sure that inside too, that their beds weren't on frames. The mattresses were directly on the floor. They were truly thinking, he and
Mm.
Miss Myrlie were truly thinking about the safety, first of all, of their children,
Yeah.
so that if anybody fired a shot, that it would not kill them.
Hmm.
Being sure that the kids would not sit on the couch with their backs to that big bay window in the front. So they, Rena knew that they could not sit there.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, Keena. This is such like I'm learning so much. Even like this is I'm so grateful for you. And even just thinking about your role within the Park Service. And can you remind people like the why this is so special? Because you mentioned the naming of the site is important. And even your role is important because
Mhm.
it's the first. It's, hasn't been done before. Can you remind people of what that means?
Yeah, so I always, I stress the home whenever they
Hmm.
say Medgar Myrlie Evers National Monument. It's like, no, it's the Medgar Myrlie Evers Home National Monument. And what many Americans don't know is that in our country, it is illegal to memorialize someone who is still alive. So even to be on a stamp, you have to be dead for 5 years, at least 5 years. So I ask people, so what is really the national monument? It's the home. It's the home. On top of that, we don't have many sites in federal sites in the United States that honors a woman. We have Bethune, and a Black woman at that. We have
Yeah.
Bethune Council House, which is great. Um, and we have Harriet Tubman now. And then we have Myrlie Evers. We know that there's so many other African American women who were involved in this movement. That's why I'm so honored that when Ms. Murley said, talk about my friends, the community, because there have been people who come up to us and go, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you? And I said, as it relates to Medgar and Myrlie Evers. I mean,
Yeah.
this is our mission. Fortunately, Medgar and Myrlie Evers knew a lot of people and they worked with a
Yeah.
lot of people. So we're able to tell their story as well as it relates to Medgar and Myrlie Evers. So those people are not forgotten because they'll never get a
Mhm.
national monument. They'll never get a national park. Some people don't even want that. Some people should, but being that that starts at a grassroots level and then it has to go through this whole political process, it probably won't ever happen. So we have the
Mhm.
opportunity to tell those stories about those others that you've never heard of, never seen, thinking that it's this great man stuff. So you get to know about their larger community.
Mhm. Wow. That's beautiful. And I'm loving how you're still connecting it back to community and the people that knew them well. Um, let's get into updates. So it's been over 2 years since we last chatted, but a lot has
Mhm.
happened since then with
Mhm.
the development of the site. And I even think about, in relation to it being Mississippi. I'm sure it's extremely hot. And having to think about, the preservation of the home and the structure and people being able to visit. So what major things have happened since 2021?
Since 2021, something major for us is that we, instead of being open one day, we're now open 3 days, and we're hoping to go to 5 days starting this summer. So having more people to have access to the home, have that power of place to learn about the lives of Medgar and Myrlie Evers and their many different communities and how they played a role in them being who they were, and are, because Miss Myrlie is still alive and she's still sharp as ever. And so we have a historian, we have a supervisory park ranger, a facilities manager, all of that stuff. And we're so close to getting those important documents completed, like the historic furnishing plan, historic structure plan, and the cultural landscape plan, so that report, so that we can, get it back to what Congress told us to do, is to make it look like it did when they lived there as a family. We also completed what we call Myrlie's Garden. And it was, we were inherited two vacant lots, nothing on them. And we used that space to talk about community. And we're trying to grow those fruits and vegetables and all that stuff that sustain the family and that community, to make Rena think that they were wealthy. And her mother said no, we weren't. And but also for that neighborhood, who is still, they are so proud of their neighborhood, and they wish that the way it looked reflected their pride and what it
Yeah,
used to be and what it can be again, so they can just go up there and relax. And that's good for the visitor and good for us as well, because this is a tough story. Some parts of it are really, really tough.
yeah,
And it harkens back to the fact that Miss Myrlie was an outdoorsy girl, and growing all of those plants and being a part of a Black female garden club in Mississippi, and him being a country boy, loving to fish and hunt and eat, fresh tomatoes. His family, they were farmers down in Decatur, Mississippi. So that plot gives us the opportunity to talk about them as a whole in their connection to land, sky, earth, all of that, because we tend to think as Black people divorced from nature, and we never were. We were
right.
always connected, and we still are connected. And the neighborhood, the people love that. What they want for us to get them now is like some rocking chairs, so they can really have that front porch experience.
Yeah. I do recall you mentioning some projects that were taking place, including the I-20. Has anything involved with that?
So we're going to be meeting up about that soon. It was put on the back burner to do the 60th. So now we're starting that back up again. We've got two hologram machines so that we can, build in some, whether it's whether it's accessibility, somebody telling the story, sign language, and what have you, or having Rena and her brother talk about their childhood. So, and some of these foot soldiers who are still around, so we'll be able, and they're portable, so we can take them places so people can hear their voices. And we're this close to completing our virtual reality tour.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That all sounds amazing. Like, I wish I
Mhm.
could just teleport there now. It's like I'm so excited to be able to visit this site, the home, and even learn even more about his children. And can you share a little bit about like how they've been engaged with the work and like sharing their father's legacy, and also what they've been doing in the community to keep that momentum?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Daryl died in 2001. He had colon
Mhm.
cancer. However, before he died, the way he got
Mm.
involved in the civil rights movement, his iteration of the civil rights movement and social justice, was through arts. And so he was a renowned painter,
Wow.
and as well as he did other things, but that's the
Yeah.
way he did it. James Van is a cinematographer, and one of the projects that he worked on recently was Women of the Movement, if you saw that on TV recently. So he
Yes.
worked on that.
Yes.
Rena is the executive director of the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Institute, and I speak to her directly about and consult with her directly about everything that's happening at the home.
Mhm.
And she makes sure that is relayed to Mama, and we get the okay from Mama before we make a move.
And what do things look like for Mama? What do things look like for Miss Murley?
I was extremely proud when she came to the home and she simply said, "You're doing a good job."
Oh,
So that was enough for me.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. That like gave me goosebumps when you said that.
Mhm, mhm, and
That's
her
beautiful.
saying, when she looked around and everything, and she says, "I wonder what it'd be like to stay here again," and I told her if she ever wanted to, all she would have to do is say the word and we would make it happen.
Mm. She's amazing. She's absolutely
Mhm,
amazing. And
mhm.
how old is Murley?
Miss Murley will be 91 March 17th. She is a St.
Wow.
Patrick's Day baby.
Wow, that's right around the corner. That is
Mhm,
awesome.
mhm.
So there was I've been seeing posts here and then in terms of social media internships. Can
Mhm.
you let us know how that shows up in the work that you do, and
Right.
when did that start happening as far as accepting interns?
So my second year here. And so this year, our supervisory park ranger is about to have a panel interview with 5 applicants to see if they want
Hmm.
to enter. And we want to make sure they get paid because
Yeah.
again, so much of, I'm sorry to say, in the federal government, it's, this unpaid stuff, right? These unpaid internships. Well, who can afford to do that? Only wealthy people or people with some sort of means. And those people tend to be from, a certain ethnic background.
Hmm.
And so many times, like even with oral histories, it was brought
Yeah.
up to me by Rena, and she makes a good point. Even though we don't have a practice in the federal government or academia at all of paying people for their oral histories, but how fair is it to use their knowledge and then profit off of it? And they get nothing. I mean, haven't we done enough to these people in these communities? And
Hmm.
so we even have we're working on a senior internship
Mm.
project as well. And so maybe being able to get some of those foot soldiers to work for us for a little bit, for 6 months to a year. And so we're trying to think of ways to, because there's nothing like hearing it from them. And then
Yeah.
on the youth side of things, Medgar and Myrlie Evers were deeply devoted into building up the next generation. And as Daryl said, not to be mini me's, but to do this work in their own way.
Hmm.
And so it
Hmm.
is crucial for us, directed by Miss Myrlie, that we reach that demographic that everybody says they're not doing anything, they are
Right.
just on their phones, they're da, 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 da. And I point out to people, it's like, I see really great content from those generations that you just throw away. And they can truly, truly, truly make a message, your site, go viral. They do
Yeah.
care. Just
Yeah.
because they may not do things your way, again, taken from Medgar and Myrlie Evers, doesn't mean it's the wrong way.
Hmm. Hmm. So have you had any, I guess, personal stories or connections from an intern in reference to history or their own, like bringing their own story into connections to parks or to civil rights history?
Oh my gosh, yes. So one of our, actually, she was a COVID hire, but now she's on with us in a 4-year term position. So love that. But
Awesome.
she was telling me that her niece's piano teacher took lessons from Miss Myrlie
Oh, wow.
because Miss Myrlie would teach piano classes, as a way to make money for the family, as well as being a part-time secretary for the NAACP when Medgar was alive. So it's like, oh my goodness. Also, one of the men who responded to his murder that night, who happened to be walking down the street to help, put his body on the mattress, is a relative of hers. And so
Wow.
these young people have
Yeah.
these connections and they know them, and you would never read that in a book. And I just feel so proud to be able to say, you don't know it all, because these are the little tidbits that my, my 18 to 30-year olds are bringing to this site and teaching y'all something.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that so much. And this is why, I mean, this is essentially why I'm doing like national parks, because a lot
Mhm.
of this stuff, like you said, you're not going to see in a textbook, you're not going
Ever.
to see in a documentary. I feel like those are things that are starting to happen more, but it's still such an abundance of information and untold stories that we still need to learn about, and realizing those connections to our own families, our own community, um, makes it so much more purposeful,
Mhm.
the work itself. And
Mhm.
I think highlighting more of the sites that, are quote unquote the capital N, capital P are just as important, those the historical, cultural, civil rights, all of that is just
Mhm.
as important as, the recreational, because
Mhm.
we've had so much a part of, we've been a part of the creation of those things and the development.
Mhm.
of those opportunities through our own hurdles, life
That's right.
hurdles. And that speaks volumes, I think. So there's many, many, many more stories like the one you're telling, and you get to be a part of with the family.
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah.
fact that you're even involved with the family and being able to make decisions for his legacy, for the family's legacy, and for the community, that's amazing. Like that is
Mhm.
absolutely amazing. So I'm so glad that we connected. I got to learn more
Yeah.
about you and your work and um, the family, and like I don't know. I feel like there's so much more to come, obviously. So,
Yeah.
and thinking about that, what would you say to anyone who's wanting to, whether it be with their home, Medgar and Myrlie Evers, or any other civil rights site? What do you feel is useful information for them to have as they think about, creating their own memories or journeying
Yes.
into learning these things?
So I also have been involved with, one of the external programs for the National Park Service. They call themselves Steel Pig, is
Mhm.
state, tribal, local plans and grants. And so they're the ones that are over the HBCU grants, colleges, that preservation, and also for the African American Civil Rights Historic Preservation grants. I bring this up because, like I said before, every site is never, is not going to be a civil rights site, or I mean
Yeah.
a national park site, nor
Yeah.
do people want it to be.
Mhm.
However, they don't know is that the African American Civil Rights Historic Preservation Grant is up to $750,000 now.
Wow.
So if your home, your site, your what have you, can get on the National Register, and if it's not, they'll help you get it on the National Register.
Yeah.
You can restore it to its integrity, and you can
Mhm.
also apply to get funding for interpretation and exhibits if you want to do something like that as well.
Mm.
And I bring this up because I am so tired of every antebellum house in the
Mm.
freaking South benefiting from this and getting all this money.
Mm.
And this is about Black agency, not somebody was just a slave and
Right.
you realize that they're just getting the money so that they can
Mhm.
restore antebellum home. It's like, what
Mhm.
did they do there? So you got to do that research and say, what did they do there? What did they think? How did they live? We're not just going to tell
Mhm.
another slave owner story. We're going to
Yeah.
change the lens that way. So I would say, y'all, if you're out there right now, look for those grants so
Yeah.
that you can tell your own story. I love the National Park Service. I do. I'm grateful for having this career and actually doing something with my degrees. When people say, what are you going to do with a history degree? To teach? And I'm like, I don't know. But we're not always the best storytellers for your story. And this gives you the opportunity to tell your story in the way that you need to.
That's powerful. And we, like you were, I think it was how we want to do it or how we want to
Yeah.
be. It's like that's part of that. It doesn't have
Mhm.
to follow a specific script or um blueprint. Like we can make it what we want it to be. And like you were
Exactly.
saying, it doesn't have to connect to, the sadness, the tragedy, the enslaved. Like it can be
No.
joy. It could be, community. It could be all of these hopeful, bright spots as well.
Thank you. I mean, and again, we are about Black joy here. And
Mhm.
so, again, when you talk about these other parks, Megan Murray Evers, after winning Best Christmas Decorations, right, from the Garden Club, the Black Garden Club, they went on a picnic where? On the Natchez Trace, which is also a
Mm.
national park. When he wanted to teach his kids about the evils of war and what
Mhm.
that can do, he took them to Vicksburg, the battlefield, another national park. So the same way we use places today, these national park sites, they did it as well. I
Mhm.
mean, he got so much joy out of that's how he dealt with his stress, fishing. And I think to myself, for my brothers and sister with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife
Yeah.
Service, when you talk about not being able to connect to Black and Brown audiences, tell those stories.
Mm-hmm. 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 That's right. Before I wrap up, there's one more thing that you mentioned in your bio that I'm really excited to learn more
Mhm.
about, and what you're doing with that specifically, is the Alabama Blackbelt National Heritage Area, and how that came to be. 'Cause the home is a part of that, correct?
Well, not the home, but
Oh,
my family, where they
yes.
grew up in Alabama, is a part of that. And so it
Hmm.
finally got designated by Congress this past year, this past fiscal
Yeah,
year.
I think was it January of last
Uh,
year,
is
2023.
oh my gosh, yes. And so here you are, to talk about that culture again, so you can talk
Yeah.
about that Black joy, but
Mm,
everything else in between. It's like what they ate,
yep.
where did they go when they
Mhm.
wanted to de-stress, the schools that they went to, the
Yeah.
roads that they walked on. And so that story now can be told. I love a national heritage area because I need the Mississippi Delta National Heritage Area in order for me to tell the complete story of Medgar and Myrlie Evers. So now I can talk about that, the land, how the environment transformed them and what it did for them. And so the Black Belt has finally been designated, and me being a Black Belt girl, my family coming there, I am just overjoyed that that those stories can finally be told. Because again, the problem that we have with our civil rights leaders is that they're presented as one dimensional, as only like sacrificial lambs. And it's hard to connect to that. But when you can connect to a human being who used those lands, the air, the sky, the waters, to race against their children, to pick blackberries, to fish, to relax with your honey on a picnic, they become flesh and blood. And that's what we need to do. We need to realize that these were human beings trying to be.
Yeah.
That's all they wanted. They wanted to
Yeah.
be.
The very basics,
The very
more,
basics.
nothing less.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the heartbreaking thing about it, right? Medgar wanted his Mississippi dream, and his Mississippi dream was to have his own farm.
Mm,
And again, for his little ones to be able to have the life that they wanted to have, not because the government, no matter if it was state, local, or federal, told them they couldn't because of their color of their
right.
skin, but because their choice. But he just wanted that. Mississippi country boy just wanted his farm and his lady and his babies. That is it. Why did he need to be assassinated for that?
Oh, sorry, I'm feeling things and processing
Mhm.
things. But yeah, this is what you're saying. And just, yeah, like even present day and even thinking about the future, like these things are still very prominent.
Mhm.
These conversations, and uh what does, community mean in these times, and why is it there needs to be an emphasis on community because of those things that have taken place in the past, and in reference to Black people overcoming so much and continue to overcome and persevere. Um,
Mhm.
and again, this is just one of many. So I appreciate you sharing, Keena, the work of the Evers family and your own. Like you're part of this history. Like even that like gives me tingles because I'm just like, like we're continuing, even though we're sharing these stories, we're making history as well, and
Mhm.
exposing and unearthing and sharing all of the connections and parallels. And I think of that specifically in relation to the work that I'm doing, because I don't know, obviously I don't know everything, in terms
I
of
don't either.
these connections, but it just shows the passion, the commitment, um, because of our own lived experiences, being a Black woman and our own feats that we have to encounter. And um, I never thought in a million years I'd be this focused on national parks in my lifetime, but like it's something that I'm just, I've always had those questions of,
Yeah.
okay, yes, we're learning
Yeah.
about these
Well,
specific
what it is,
things
ma'am, is
in
it's
time and
all
history. And I always just, what were Black people doing? What
Mhm.
were they,
power,
excited about? What were they passionate about?
power.
What
It
were they
has
committing to in their
Mhm.
communities?
power pole
But then
stuff.
also thinking about
What is it
how
going
can
to
I
take
be a part of
for
that work
power
too
to be
That's
bring
right.
in
power to the
modern
young
times and moving forward and being able to inspire other people. But I feel like it starts with the storytelling. Like,
It
what
does.
is your story? How did it
Mhm.
begin for you? Whether it
uh,
be a connection to civil rights
uh,
or land or
what happened.
um, your ancestors. Like, there's so many things that are interwoven into that, and I
What
think
happened.
it's a reminder that we can tell stories at any point
You
in our life.
can.
Like it
Well,
doesn't have to be like a cutoff point of like, well,
no.
I'm done. Somebody else do it. But like it means so much more when you are given that, like you were saying, autonomy to tell what you've experienced and not leave that to someone else because it can be misconstrued. It can be, bits and pieces taken out that are really important, but for
Yeah.
a reason, for an agenda, it's left out.
And you just said it best. You just entered the discussion. You just entered the
Hmm.
discussion that we've been having, as I jokingly say, since Lucy came out of the trees in Africa, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Medgar entered the discussion that he was having with Thomas Jefferson. You say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's talk. Let's talk. He
Hmm.
was having a discussion with Harriet Tubman. So you just entered the discussion that has been going on and on and on, and we're going to keep clacking and clattering about this. I hope we do, right? I entered the discussion with some of the things that I've been doing with certain people because we're always wrestling with this. It's like, what
Yeah.
does a fully inclusive democracy look like? I know what you meant, Patrick Henry. I know what you
Mhm.
meant, George Washington, but I disagree with you on some certain things. Let's talk. Let's talk.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. So what do the things look like for you moving forward? Anniversary, what is it? Fourth anniversary will be in
So
December.
Well, actually, the 60th anniversary of, as we talked about that Civil Rights Act, the 60th anniversary of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is in April. One
Hmm.
thing that we're working on big time, again, talking about Black Joy, is
Yeah.
that Medgar and his very good friend, B.B. King, would have been 100 years old in 2025. So we're partnering with the B.B. King Museum
Oh,
to do
wonderful.
stuff in honor of them like the entire year,
Yeah.
because one story is left out is that these civil rights organizations again couldn't get most of them couldn't get traditional loans. So
Hmm.
you have when people go, oh, just shut up and sing or shut up and play. Well, that never happened. They were doing these concerts, getting these endorsements and what have you, and a lot of them turning that money over to the civil rights movement. BB King did the same thing. He hosted memorial blues festivals in Medgar's honor after his assassination. And, to the point that Miss Myrlie says, oh, BB, and, just calls him by name. So this is
Hmm.
going to be all about Black joy and all the things they gave them joy, whether it's food,
Yeah.
music, fast cars,
Hmm.
dominoes
Hmm.
and cards, all of that.
Wow, that is
Mhm.
awesome. Thank you for that update. It's good to know that there's more to include in that joy to
Mhm.
continue to celebrate. And if anyone's interested in learning more about the home, where can they go? Where can they get information? And what do you have planned for interns? I know that's
Yeah.
something that's still continuing, but what will that look like for this year?
So this year, like I said, we're doing the interviewing, and we hope to go get a senior intern. But next year, definitely, we're going to fund some interns if they're interested in helping us with the 100th birthday celebration. So, the thing about it is, Jackson gets a bad rep, but you know how it is. It's like when you actually live in a place, you see
Yeah.
something totally different.
Yeah.
So sometimes we do have a problem with recruiting interns and staff because they hear, oh, Jackson, oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
I always say to people, it's like, imagine if somebody said that about where you live,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
In a sense, you're calling the people bad.
Right? This is how I feel about Cleveland.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you're there, oh my goodness, like
Right.
amazing things are happening.
Yeah. And so for me, Jackson is a cool place, even though I'm
Mhm.
an Alabama girl, but, learning about Jackson through the eyes of Medgar and Myrlie Evers, everywhere I walk, I'm just like, that happened there, that happened there, that happened there. It's just like they're walking with me,
Yeah.
and I just think it's the coolest thing in the world. So we
Yeah.
hope that we can entice some interns to work with us next year. And usually we pay between $18 and $20 an hour. So not bad for an internship.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So I am so excited for all of this. Congratulations on the work you're doing and continuing to do, and it's so needed. It's so important. Um, I am hoping 'cause these I don't have a plan.
Neither do I.
I have ideas, but I don't have like a concrete plan of like what this is going to turn into, what it's going to look like. I feel like each month
Mhm.
is something to be excited about because I feel like every month I have a new idea of how I want to expand
Mhm.
this Black and National Parks work and like really honing in again on the storytelling, but also showcasing what the work looks like through um, Black lens. Like, what
Mhm.
does that look like for Black people? How are they showing up? How are they
Right.
giving themselves permission to be curious, to ask questions, to build experiences, and not just, well, that's something I heard about, but I'm not going to try it or do it. It's like
Mhm.
really hopefully helping encourage more Black people to take that leap and visit more of these places,
Oh, please do.
whether it be for a day, a week, a month, whatever. Like I highly encourage it, and um, I'm in the idea stage of creating a Black and National Parks conference. So I'm hoping to get more feedback in general for, what
Mhm.
would make it something really special for Black people to attend and be a part of. So that's going to be really, really important feedback for me. But also just thinking about, the storytelling and expanding on
Yeah.
that as
Yeah.
opportunities for more like short documentaries or even podcasts.
Mhm.
So I think there's definitely room to grow, but I'm certainly going to take my time. I'm in no rush,
Yeah.
but
May I
it's
add
good to
this, that
know.
and
Yeah.
whatever you do, add a component in there, and I got some good contacts. In
Mhm.
fact, his name is Trevino Henderson. He's
Uh,
helped me to effectively recruit and have a staff that reflects the demographic of the United States. So, one of those things I always encourage people to do is just like you asked about internship, contact those parks and say, what do you got? What jobs are open, what have you, and have Trevino or somebody like that come out and do a session on dusting up those federal resumes, doing them the right way, because we know they're way different, so
yeah.
that we can have a National Park Service, because we don't have it now, that
Mhm.
reflects the demographics of the United States of America.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's so important. And we also have to think about 2026 because it's going to be, was it
250.
250th
Yeah.
of the US
Mhm.
becoming, was it 1776?
Declaration of
Like, oh my
Independence.
goodness.
Yeah.
So there's more to come in terms of those conversations, for sure. So
Mhm.
I want to thank you again for sharing your time with me, sharing your knowledge, like such awesome information. Like I'll probably end up just watching this again because there's so much. Um, but also, to the audience, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. And I hope you learned a substantial amount about the site, the home of Medgar and Myrlie Evers. And definitely check out, there's the mps.gov website if you want to
Yeah.
learn more about the site, as well as any other of the established civil rights national park units. Please explore.
Amen. We're all
And
connected.
then make a visit. Like literally, you said if it's expanded to 3 days now, right? For visitation. So
Mhm.
is there a specific time that you're open
10
throughout the
to 4.
months, or is it year round?
Year round, 10 to 4, but like I said, we're gonna expand that to 5 days,
Okay.
probably in May or June, because again, we can't keep this story to ourselves. We wanna
Yeah.
tell as many people as possible.
Yes. Yes. And please continue just being amazing. I love you. You're awesome. And I can't wait to meet you in person. Like I'm just already
Same.
like in my brain, like let's just hang out and spend the day together and just, yeah, continuing to share in that joy.
Let's do it.
So I, again, very much appreciate you. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. And I will be posting the replay. So if you weren't able to tune in during this time, you can watch the replay at a later time, as well as the first interview that I did with Keena back in 2021. Um, I'm so thrilled. Thank you again.